Now I'd like to introduce our chairman, Pragna Bharati, Padma Shree, Dr. Tripuraneni Hanuman Chowdary Garu. He's 90-year young driving force behind Pragna Bharati. He is a man who needs no introduction. He is the definition of an intellectual warrior, a proud son of Mahabharati, proud nationalist and Sanatani. Dr. T. Hanuman Chowdary Garu, an engineer by profession, is regarded as a path-breaking pioneer in the telecom and IT industry. He has received both national and international recognition for his tremendous contribution to this field. In recognition of his services in the telecom and IT sector, he was awarded Padma Shri in the year 2017 by the then President of India, Sri Pranab Mukherjee. He has authored more than 200 books and 15 monographs, some of which are The Tales, The Telephone Tell, Telephoning Rural Areas of Andhra Pradesh, Are You Listening? India Under Strain, Truth Triumphs, India on Freedom Road, The Anguish of a Bharatiya. Any introduction I give cannot do justice to the long list of extraordinary accomplishments of this exemplary individual. His life is spent in the relentless service of Bharat Mata and dissemination of our Sanatanic value system. Dr.
To
T.
be
Hanuman
invited
Chowdary Garu.
to talk about one of the meteor-like Bharatiyas, Aurobindo Ghosh. He hailed from Bengal, which produced a large number of illustrious persons in the 19th century. Rabindranath Tagore, Vivekananda, Subhash Chandra Bose, Chittaranjan Das, Bankim Chandra, Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, Ram Mohan Roy, and such great stalwarts who, whose stellar contributions to wake up India and put it on a path of freedom led to the word, what Bengal thinks today, the rest of India will think tomorrow. Unfortunately, in the last 50 years, Bengal has gone astray because of the Marxists and almost fascist-like person who have been ruling Bengal. Let it be, but the stellar contribution of one of its great sons, inspired by Bankim Chandra and others, was Sri Aurobindo Ghosh. Sri Aurobindo Ghosh. His father did not want that he should speak any Indian language. He should not imbibe any Indian culture. And therefore, at the age 7, in 1879, he was sent to England to be tended by nannies and instructed in English and everything Western. For 14 years he was in England and he returned to India in 1903. And for the next 13 years he was in Baroda from 1893 to 1906. What is it, Baroda? Shaji Rao, the ruler of that state, was a very progressive person. He appointed Aurobindo Ghosh as the principal of the college. He was teaching French, he was teaching English, he was teaching philosophy, and so on. And when he was there, from 1893 to 1906, in the year 1905, Bengal was divided by Raj Karjan into East Bengal, what is now Bangladesh, plus Assam, with a Muslim majority, and the rest of what Bengal today is. It was called Banga Bhanga, that is the destruction, the division of Bengal. That was a great mighty movement. Now, Aurobindo Ghosh, while in the service of the Maharaja of Baroda in the college, he tried with the idea of revolution, of armed revolution. He got into touch with the stormy petrel of Indian politics, the father of Indian unrest, Lokmanya Bal Gangadhar Tilak. And he was in a secret society, also in correspondence with Bengal's revolutionaries. So 1905, Banga Bhanga activated him into open politics. He resigned from the service of Maharaja of Baroda, and in 1906 he went to Calcutta as the principal of National College. Here that word National College. It was started by a donation of 100,000 rupees by a very good Jamindar. And what was it? National Education, National College. You may be remembering, or you can recall, that if a decade later on, in India, there were so many national colleges. There was one in Machilipatnam. And what is national education? He was brought up as an Englishman, with English manners, in English tongue, but he thought of national college to induce nationalism in the Indians. And when he went to Calcutta in 1906, it was blazing. The movement to undo Banga Bhanga, to undo the division of Bengal, there was a movement. He was appointed as the editor of Vande Mataram and also Jugantar, another that was a Bengali daily. He wrote fiery editorials. And even while in Baroda, he was writing for Hindu Prakash, that is enlightening India, the enlightened India. So here, the Muslims in 1905, the Indian Muslim League was founded in Dhaka, and that was year of the division of Bengal. So the Muslims of Bengal and the rest in India, they were all with the mighty British Empire with Lord Curzon. And there was no Gandhi then. Nobody ever thought of, unless we have Hindu-Muslim unity, we can undo this one. No. Hindus have got the Shakti. That Shakti has to be aroused. It must be ignited. That was what Aurobindo Ghosh was doing in the brief period 1906. I come to 1910. In those 4 years, that was only 4 years he was in active politics, tending, igniting. And what were the slogans? Vande Mataram, Swadeshi, and Swaraj, and boycott. Swaraj was the word that he used, and he and Lokmanya Tilak. And Swadeshi, they boycotted the British goods, not others. Because Ghosh said, Aurobindo said, that when India is free, we will have international trade. We have to import certain things, we have to export certain things. Our fight is only with the British. And that's why he said, boycott the British goods. Vande Mataram, Swaraj, Swadeshi, and national education. In 1907, the Indian National Congress met in Surat, and it got split into moderates led by Gokhale, Nauroji, and others. What were they doing until then? From 1885 to 1907, petitions, mergers, appeals, pamphlets, and in pandals passing resolutions. No public, the masses were not involved. Aurobindo Ghosh said this won't do. So, inspired by Lokmanya Tilak, Lala Lajpat Rai, and Bipi Chandra Pal, Lal, Bal, Pal. These three fiery nationalist leaders, for them, the intellectual input was added to them by Aurobindo Ghosh. They wanted to move for resolutions. They were opposed by the so-called moderates presided over by Gopal Krishna Gokhale. They elected Rashbihari away, Bose, Rashbihari Ghosh as the president of the Surat Congress. But the leftists, the revolutionaries, they met separately and elected Aurobindo Ghosh as the president of the Nationalist Party within the Congress. Ghosh went back Aurobindo went back to Calcutta, and he was writing fiery editorials in the Vande Mataram and Jugantar. He was tried for sedition, sentenced for 1 year jail. He was put in Alipur jail. And what is this? 1906. So in jail, in Alipur jail, after 1 year, and in the jail, he had visions. He had visions. God speak to him. God speak to him. So he was defended. He did not want to defend himself or engage any liar. He says that God himself has appointed Chittaranjan Das as his defendant. And Chittaranjan Das pleaded and he was acquitted. But he was immediately implicated in another sedition case and sent him to Alipur Central Jail. There again he had visions that your field of activity is not going to be the politics, but it is something else, which later on came to be defined that there is going to evolution. He wrote a book called Life Divine. In that he says evolution from lower forms of life to higher forms of life. But why do you think that evolution will stop with man? Man shall become Superman and life shall become divine. Therefore, life divine and Superman. Just imagine now with artificial intelligence and information technology, man has got the possibility of becoming a Superman. But whether life will become divine or not depends upon individuals. We'll come to that later. So his brother, Bharindra Ghosh, he was also implicated in a case of sedition and he was to be hanged. On appeal, it was commuted to life imprisonment and he was sent into Andaman's jails. He was released only in 1920. Bharindra Ghosh, his brother. So, after release of Aurobindo Ghosh from Alipur Central Jail, the British were thinking of putting another case and sending him away to Andamans. Sister Nivedita came to know of it and warned Aurobindo Ghosh, saying, this is what is going to happen, escape. He immediately escaped to Chandanagar, which is a French territory. And from there, he sailed to Pondicherry, and that is the end of his political career. So before going to Pondicherry, in a span of 4 years, he has created a revolutionary atmosphere in the Bengali youth. And by his fiery speeches and by the association with Lal Bal Pal, he became an all India figure. So before his move to Pondicherry, he rose like a meteor. What were the things he bequeathed to us? That is, boycott the British goods, Swaraj, Swadeshi. Abhi, Modi ji is saying Atmanirbhar Bharat. Atmanirbhar Bharat is the current slogan, but it was begun with Swadeshi. So, what did he do? Before going to Pondicherry, in Uttarpara, there was a society for the defense of Hindu Dharma. So he addressed that. That's again, it's called the Uttarpara speech. Very famous speech. In that, he has spoken about the great vision that he had, and that every action of his, every decision of his is from a message from God. While reading the Uttarpara speech, his speech was just like the Old Testament of the Bible. All those prophets, in what type of language they spoke, communion with God, God guiding them, etc., etc. So I was wondering whether Aurobindo Ghosh had also become a saint or a prophet in that line. Most of the sentences says God. It is God that has guided me. It is God that asked me not to engage in a defense. It is God that is taking me to Pondicherry and so on. That was his faith, and he completely withdrew from political activity. However, he started in 1914 a journal called Arya, worship, person to be worshipped. That is, and from there he was writing, he was giving an exposition of all of the philosophy, the sources of which were the Vedas and the Upanishads, and he is going beyond them. That was what Arya was propagating. And in 1920s, he established the Pondicherry ashram, and there so many other people had been attracted from all over India, etc. In 1920s, in 1920, year afterwards, he is withdrawing. First, what is the lesson that we have to take from his activity before going to Pondicherry? It is not necessary that the Muslims have to be befriended in order to bend the British and get independence. It is the Hindu Shakti, Hindu determination, Hindu Sanghatan that has defeated the British, the mighty British, after a struggle from 1905 to 1911, a 6-year-long struggle where only Hindus were involved without any talk of Hindu-Muslim unity, because he knew that Hindus and Muslims are incompatible. I will come to that a little later. So his political activity ended, but his involvement, his visions that you are the agent for making that is great Bharat, to be a Jagat Guru once again, which is eternal philosophy of Sanatan Dharma, which is integrative and not disruptive. Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, Sahanavavatu, Sahanau Bhunattu, Sahaviryam Karabhava Ekam Sat, Vipra Bahudha Vadanti. These are the messages which Sanatan Dharma gives. Therefore, it is inclusive of the entire humanity. And it is my task, I have been commissioned, or rather God has inspired me to take this message, to propagate this message, so that Bharat will show to the entire world how the evolution has to be. If there is no spiritual upliftment, all other attempts for relieving humanity of all its ills will not be successful. Therefore, man is essentially a spiritual person, and it is that spirituality that I want to awaken in Bharat and all the Bharatiyas, and through them all over India, all over the world. Friends, he emphasized, he placed greatest emphasis on national education. This national education college was started in Calcutta. And what is that national education? Drawing from the springs of our ancient, what sages have seen and recorded, or rather go by the name of the Vedas and later Upanishads. Man is essentially a spiritual man. He is not a original sinner as Christianity says. Amrutasya putraha, who are the children of deathlessness. Who is deathless? It is God. We are the children of God. It is not original sin. We are not sinners. On the other hand, we are Daivi Putras. That is what his message. In 1920, Gandhi involved the Nationalist Secular Congress in India's Muslims agitation. No Muslim anywhere in the world is agitated. India's Muslims agitated for the restoration of the Arab countries to the empire of Turkey and to re-establish the Caliph, the Sultan of Turkey as the Caliph for all the Muslims. Gandhi involved in Munje was to preside over that Nagpur Congress. Actually, earlier in 1997 itself, the Congress was to be in Nagpur, but Nagpur was always nationalist. That's why Gokhale got it shifted to Surat, where the old timers were very, very strong. That is the aside. So he said Gandhiji is doing the greatest blunder by saying, Gandhiji even said, so I am not interested in Swaraj now. First, I have to get the Muslims into this nationalist movement. And Ghosh said, this is the greatest blunder that this Gandhiji is committing. Dr. Munje was to preside over the Nagpur Congress. He went to Aurobindo Ghosh, please come, take active part. No, I won't come. And afterwards, Munje parted from the Congress and joined the Hindu Mahasabha. Later, when Barindra Ghosh, his brother, was released in 1920, he again went to Pondicherry requesting Aurobindo Ghosh, please come into politics. No, I won't come. Chittaranjan Das, the one who pleaded for his release, he went to Pondicherry, requested him to come. No. Gandhi sent Devdas Gandhi, his son, to Aurobindo Ghosh in Pondicherry with the idea that he should be brought back into the political movement. He said, no, I am working for a larger cause. Friends, so before going to Pondicherry, he was an active revolutionary, and for him, nationalism is Hinduism. Hinduism is a nationalism. What is that Hinduism? Ism is a bad word. So he said Sanatan Dharma, that is, and Shakti, that we have to have Shakti, Durga, etc., etc.
I request Chella Didi to take over and introduce Ananda Bhaiya.
Thank you, Rinda. Now we are going to listen to the second speaker, Dr. Anand Reddy. Dr. V. Anand Reddy holds the position of the chairman of the Institute of Human Study, Hyderabad. The only aim of his life has been to disseminate Sri Aurobindo's vision to every corner of India and the world. He has traveled wide across India and the world to USA, Europe, and Far East to share his insights and research on Sri Aurobindo's works. His deep understanding of his works has come about by his incessant study for the last 50 years. Dr. Reddy got his school and undergraduate education from Sri Aurobindo International School, Center of Education, commonly known as Ashram School. Living directly under the care of the mother from 1958, he had many interviews and letter exchanges with her. With the mother's blessings, he also served in Aurobindo for about 7 years. He has, to his credit, about 800 hours recorded talks giving explanations of Sri Aurobindo's major works. He has also brought out edited versions of his talks on the life divine, and has authored over 100 articles on various themes on Sri Aurobindo's works. For his wide contributions towards Sri Aurobindo scholarship, he was given Sri Aurobindo Puraskar and Auro Ratna awards. Dr. Reddy is also the director of Sri Aurobindo Center for Advanced Research, that is SAKAR, at Pondicherry. So SAKAR has been established in 1998 and has been disseminating Sri Aurobindo's and the mother's thought and vision through academic courses, seminars, workshops, and publications. I request Dr. B. Ananda Reddy to please start his talk.
Namaskar.
Namaskar.
There's a beautiful message from the mother of Pondicherry given to us in 1968. She wrote, India has become the symbolic representation of all difficulties of modern mankind. India will be the land of resurrection, the resurrection to a higher and truer life. And that gives us the essence almost of what I have to say this evening on Sri Aurobindo, what I call India's problems and Sri Aurobindo's solutions. Purna Swaraj was the mantra of pre-independence decades. Freedom to break India seems to be the Shadayantra of post-independent India. But it's true. As years roll into decades after the independence, the times are getting to be more turbulent. Fierce in ideology and putting to shame the spirit of non-violence and satyagraha that reigned the spirit of India in her pre-independence years. Fanaticism in the name of religion, creeds, isms stroll in every street, threatening the common and the innocent people. Corruption seems to have corroded our very souls. The right to freedom of speech and notions of democracy have led to the jungle Raj, where the power and punch of money and political conditions rule every act and thought of the helpless common lot. Democracy has turned into demonization, and economic revival is transformed into economic survival. And yet, in spite of all these hollow worm eaters from India, outside India and inside India, Sri Aurobindo was not disillusioned about the great and inevitable glorious future of the country. He wrote, within them I find the soul of a civilization alive, though sleeping. I see upon it consoling sentence of God. Because thou hast believed in me, therefore thou shalt live and not perish. As the mother said, Sri Aurobindo always loved deeply his motherland. But he wished her to be great, noble, pure, and worthy of her big mission in the world. He refused to let her sink to the sordid and vulgar level of blind self-interest and ignorant prejudices. Sri Aurobindo indeed loved his country very deeply. But at the same time, he was not blind to the weaknesses of our culture, of our society, of our policies, of our thinking. So in one of his writings in the Karma Yoga, written almost 100 years back, he wrote, the spirit and ideals of India had come to be confined in a mold which, however beautiful, was too narrow and slender to bear the mighty burden of her future. So that is what had happened. And Sri Aurobindo traces three main strands of how India became weak in the period of the Britishers and even the period of the Mughal conquests. The first one, it says, is a sinking of that superabundant vital energy which is still, which has lost, which has been fading from the joy of our life and the joy of creation. Second one is a rapid cessation of the old free intellectual activity, a slumber of the scientific and the critical mind, as well as the creative intuition. What remains becomes more and more a repetition of ill-understood fragments of past knowledge. As Sri Aurobindo puts it very strongly, there's a petrification of the mind and life of the relics of the forms, which a great intellectual past had created. Old authority and rule become rigidly despotic, and as always then happens, lose their real sense and spirit. In another journal he wrote, "It is my belief that the main cause of India's weakness is not subjection, nor poverty, nor a lack of spirituality or religion, but a diminution of the power of thought." This, I suppose, is one of the most important things pointed out by Sri Aurobindo. Because we blame always saying India is a poor country, it has become poor after the Britishers and all that. But it's not so. What has become weak is this question of a diminution of the power of thought. The spread of ignorance in the birthplace of knowledge. Everywhere I see an inability or unwillingness to think, incapacity of thought or thought phobia. So this is the remarkable insight that Sri Aurobindo had. Let us not blame economic poverty or this or that, or because of the colonization, etc. It is over the centuries, we have lost this capacity of thinking for ourselves. We have become mere imitators, repeating what the Western world has given to us. Even today, it's the same trend. So India is not very rich in that sense of the thought phobia. It's only now it is awakening. It's begun to think for itself. And then now it is a time when people are thinking, who are we actually? Because till now we have been we as presented by the Britishers, by the Western world. Even today the Western world is trying to paint an image of our culture and our politics and our life. But I'm happy to see that in the light of Sri Aurobindo, things are changing and we're beginning to be ourselves. We're asking who are we, what is our history, what is our really culture at its roots. And this is what Sri Aurobindo had really done in his journal Vande Mataram while he was in Calcutta. He had always awakened the Indians to their own strength, to their own culture. And it's very significant that he did so from Bengal. Well, Bengal was the place where the westernization was at its worst. So Sri Aurobindo had tackled this question right in the middle of a westernization of India, especially in West Bengal. So that was the second point, that is the thought phobia. The third thing Sri Aurobindo says, the spirituality remains, but burns no longer with the large and clear flame of knowledge of former times, but in intense jets and in a dispersed action which replaces the old magnificent synthesis and in which certain spiritual truths are emphasized to neglect the others. We still pride ourselves saying that we are a spiritual country, but we may be having spirituality, but there's no more that intensity. Sri Aurobindo describes in great detail in his book, Renaissance in India and other writings, There are, as he puts it here, there are large, intense jets. As we know, jets are a little spur of movement, a few days, a few months, and then there's no more enthusiasm. So this is what Indian spirituality is today, and is what we have to revive, get back. Not just the knowledge saying, oh, we have read the Vedas and the Upanishads and the Gita. It's more a question of emphasizing a magnificent synthesis, and a certain spiritual truths are emphasized and not at the cost of others. So unless and until we get back that knowledge which synthesizes, Indian spirituality will not awaken to its own truth. And that synthesis is marvelously portrayed in Sri Aurobindo's writings. If Sri Aurobindo stands for anything, as a philosopher, as a poet, or a social thinker, any other, one word that applies to him, that he is a grand synthesis of entire Indian ethos, spiritual ethos, and as well as the Western and Indian thought, philosophic thought, psychological thought, historical thought. So that is, I think, one of the contributions, major contributions to Sri Aurobindo, what he has said himself, a magnificent synthesis which was there in our ancient times has to be brought back. And Sri Aurobindo has been a pioneer to bring back the synthesis. And then, after saying this, Sri Aurobindo now comes more poignantly to the description of two major problems in India. Two major. This, what we have discussed till now, is more or less a general thing, the present situation. But the two important things where we have almost betrayed our Indian culture is that of two things, what it says, education. Well, let me take up education first. And remember, what we see today in our universities, I'm sorry to say, most of our universities have come to a standstill, but which was already foreseen and forevisioned by Sri Aurobindo in the early centuries of the 20th century. Here is a passage where he writes, if the physical training, the Indian university, provides its contemptible and moral training nil, the mental training is also meager in quantity and worthless in quality. I mean, what a prophetic sentence. Something uttered 120 years back almost has become more and more valid and true today. It's a worthless and meager in quantity. In order for a student to get a degree, let us make it absolutely necessary that he shall have good education. If a worthless education is sufficient in order to secure his object and good education quite unessential, it is obvious that the student will not incur great trouble and diversion of energy in order to acquire what he feels to be unnecessary. It's exactly line by line, word to word, the situation of the universities today. If the student feels, I don't have to work hard, I can do by anything, by any way, moral, immoral, legal, illegal, whatever way I can do, but I can get that certificate. So Sri Aurobindo says, why should he really work for it? And what we have seen then has become a greater reality today. But change the state of things. That's the solution. Is he gave so long back, and still today, nothing has been done. But change the state of things. Make culture and true science essential, and the same interest and motive which now makes him content with a bad education will then compel him to strive after culture and true science. You see, lo and behold, none of our people on the education level have realized the importance of two things, our studies of culture and study of science. And Sri Aurobindo had advised us 120 years back, still they are unable to do that. Maybe I should not be blind to what NEP has come, National Education Policy, is trying to bring back those two elements of the scientific spirit and study of culture. That's already on the right road. So Sri Aurobindo would say, we have always preserved our intellect, in spite of this, what's happening even today. Sri Aurobindo is assuring us that we have always preserved our intellectual alertness, quickness, and originality. But this is a great assurance that India is not dead. India's soul has not withdrawn. There is the alertness and quickness and originality. But even this last gift is threatened by our university system. Shree, please remark, he uses the word by our university system, and if it goes, it will be the beginning of irretrievable degradation and final extinction. So a person in those days when there were few universities had already seen the trend of this university education and how the little that we have saved for ourselves, the intellectual alertness, quickness, and originality may go. And then it says, the very first step in reform must therefore be to revolutionize the whole aims and methods of our education. And I'm happy to say that the present NEP, National Education Policy, has definitely looked into this revolutionizing the aims and the methods of our education. But the details, most of you know what I mean, but at least the orientation, the reorientation has been taken, and then we have tried to pursue that. And then he would say that we have thus an education system which develops neither a critical mind nor a creative intuition. That was since the beginning, when Sri Aurobindo said, we have a soulless education because it has become a commercial education, brainwashing young minds to earn a living at whatever cost, even at the cost of bartering one's soul. What was then, in the early 20th century, Sri Aurobindo says, we have a soulless education. It still continues. Till recently, I don't know, even now it's continuing. I don't know when this NEP will really come into strict policy making, and then India, all the schools of education will take up this new policy. That means, basically, we need to bring back India's soul into education. Otherwise, it will be too late for us to recover. And in fact, very interestingly, a great philosopher, a poet, a critic called Ananda Swami had written something similar. He said, a single generation of English education suffices to break the threads of traditions and to create a nondescript and superficial being deprived of all roots, a sort of intellectual pariah, a beautiful phrase, a sort of intellectual pariah who does not belong to the East or to the West, the past or the future. I think it's a brilliant description of the young minds today. We are not ourselves. We are neither the past, nor the present, nor the West, nor the East. An intellectual pariah, we belong to nobody. The influence of materialism, the influence of the Western world, and trying to see that what is India. And in India, unfortunately, we have not yet come out with sufficient material from our own past that we can inspire the youngsters. As Sri Aurobindo also mentions that we have gone into so much of this commercialization. It will take us a long time. At least the beginning has been made, but by the time we make a full effort, it may take time. But that was the first problem. The second one, of course, is what Sri Aurobindo calls the problem of parliamentary democracy. You see, there are thousands of problems in India. It's difficult to say how many problems. But what we are striking at is the roots of Indian problems of Indian country, India as at present. One is a terrible education, and the other is this democracy, parliamentary democracy. And in fact, I was surprised to see and to read a novel, a book by Sunil Khilnani, his book, The Idea of India. I mean, when he describes how this constitution was written, our Indian constitution, how it was penned in the beginning years, here is what he has to write. Constitutional democracy based on universal suffrage did not emerge from popular pressures for it within the Indian society. It was not wrested by the people from the state. It was given to them by the political choice of an intellectual elite. The drafting of the constitution rested in the hands of only about 24 lawyers. I think this opens up our eyes. When Shree Aurobindo also criticizes this, not meant it has been again a copy, if not a cut and paste, a very close copy of the British Constitution. Most people in India had no idea of what exactly they had been given. Like the British Empire is supplanted, India's constitutional democracy was established in a fit of absent-mindedness. And here is a writer who has really done his work, I can tell you that. It was neither unintended nor lacking in deliberation, but it was unwitting in the sense that the elite who introduced it was itself surprisingly insouciant. That means you can see the word insouciant, lack of concern. It was surprisingly insouciant about the potential implications of its actions. No wonder we see when we have heard, we have read, and we come to know that the Britishers do not have a written constitution. That means they have developed it over centuries, over years and centuries, out of a real experience of their own culture, of their own needs, of their own minds, of their own demands. But we were given 3 years only to draft this, given it to a bunch of a group of lawyers who had nothing to do with the state, the aspirations of the country, what we had in our past. Because democracy is not something new to India. We always had this system of democracy, but not a parliamentary democracy, not something that was in a huddle put together somehow and copied from Britishers and put it up and engage on us. But this kind of a fast forward thing that was really imposed on us. So nobody afterwards thought about it. And it was really unfortunate that we have had to go through that. And that's what Shree Aurobindo says in one of his messages. He says, in fact, before I read out Shree Aurobindo, I'd like to read out something closer to our times. That after this democracy, parliamentary democracy constitution was given to us, in the beginning we didn't even think about what we were getting, as we said. We were given something, we formed something in a big hurry, we constituted parliamentary democracy, we built the whole parliamentary building, we started making parties and all that. But down the line, after about so many years, after beginning of 60 years, I can say, we have the speech by former Speaker of our Lok Sabha, Somnath Chatterjee, in August 2012. His parting words when he was leaving his post, he gave a very significant message to the Parliament. He said, after more than 6 decades of our independence, we have come to a stage when questions are being asked about the workability of our democratic setup based on the parliamentary system and about the utility and relevance of our vital democratic institutions. This is as late as 2012. People in their wisdom have begun to see the relevance of this democratic system. And this is what was announced in the parliament itself by no lesser than a person than the Speaker of the Lok Sabha. And long back, of course, Shree Aurobindo himself has said that can this be worked out? He said, the parliamentary form would be hardly suitable for our people. And mind you, this he wrote even before we formed the parliament, 1947, even before that, 1950. So what all we say, we think Shree Aurobindo has written this and that. But mostly we see his ideas have been mostly prophetic. Every sentence is a prophecy almost. Be it on the social level, so philosophical level of consciousness, about the countries, everything. In fact, he is a great prophet. Not announcing it, not wanting it to be, wanting it to be one. But everything is said. So look at the sentence. It says the parliamentary form would be hardly suitable for our people. And in other places, he says, spirituality is India's only politics. The fulfillment of Sanatana Dharma is only Swaraj. Then he comes out strongly. I have no doubt we shall have to go through our parliamentary period in order to get rid of the notion of Western democracy by seeing in practice how helpless it is to make nations blessed. Very clear view. But it says, unfortunately, we have to go through and only to realize that how terrible it is. And that's what our Somnath Chatterjee had told us, that we are really in the situation we are beginning to doubt. This is from as late as 2012. And Sri Aurobindo had written it long, many years back. Then he further writes, it was mastered in the inception by the inrush of a divine force, which came in 1905 and aroused it from its state of complete tamasic ajnanam, ignorance. This is another prophetic view there, that in 1905, there was some kind of a divine force that came upon earth and especially on India. And most probably on India, I would not say about on earth. Because it says it came to arouse the tamas that is settled in the Indian conscious, subconscious. But as happens also with the individuals, all that was evil, all the wrong samskaras and wrong emotions and mental and moral habits rose with it and misused the divine force. So that is the time, 1905, when, as we know, there was this partition of Bengal. So that was the beginning of a force that really came to help, but there was almost the kind of a revolutionary resistance. And so he says, all that has happened, all the dirt and the muck and the wrong side, the evil side of humanity came up, and it misused that force, and we have a division in Bengal, and after 40 years almost, we have another partition. It is only when this foolishness is done with, the truth will have a chance. The Sattvic mind in India emerged, and a really strong spiritual movement begin as a prelude to India's regeneration. Here is a prophet, he is not in a hurry. He says he knows what is happening on the subtle physical level. He is not a seer who's seeing only what is happening on the physical level. He is seeing from a beyond. As we have been told many a time, he was really a Trikala Drishti, who knew the past, who knows the present, who knows the future. And he knows the present in the light of the future. Because he sees the future and he knows what's going to be the next, he has a full comprehensive view of the present, and that is why he can really give a proper analysis of the picture. Those politicians who see only the tomorrow and the next month and the next elections cannot ever have this kind of a vision. So Sri Aurobindo says, unfortunately, we have to go through this and only prove that it is not useful for India. It was very early enough, within 60 years, our Somnath Chatterjee declared it. But that has gone maybe in the wind, more like a message that has been printed out. But even then, people have not awakened to that. Well, that is, he says, more and more things will go bad, worse, and then we'll have to come to a point when we'll have to change our system, and then we may have to supplant this parliamentary system. And you may ask, what is the system that he wants, that Sri Aurobindo would want? Well, and there's a hint here in one of his letters again. Socialistic democracy is the only true democracy. For without it, we cannot get the equalized and harmonized distribution of functions. Each part of the community existing for the good of all and not struggling for its own separate interests, which will give humanity as a whole the necessary conditions in which it can turn its best energies to its higher developments. To realize those conditions is also the aim of Hindu civilization and the original intention of caste. The fulfillment of Hinduism is a fulfillment of the highest tendencies of human civilization, and it must include in its sweep and the most vital impulses of modern life. It would include democracy and socialism also, purifying them, raising them above the excessive stress of the economic adjustments, which are the means, and teaching them to fix their eyes upon constantly and clearly on the moral, intellectual, and spiritual perfection of mankind, which is the end. This is a hint. Of course, much work needs to be done. Some historians, some students of social sciences, some political sciences have started to study this, the alternative that Shree is speaking of. And that is why we say the Shree is a prophet in everything that is spoken about society, individual, or the country. So having said this, we see that we see in a way that these are the root problems. Education, our, twisted education, soulless education, which has gone out of the track, and this question of democracy. Now the thing is, can we rectify this? Can we at all rectify this question of the education and our democracy? Well, it's a bit difficult because we have come to think that it is our right to have democracy. It's our right to have freedom of speech. It's our right. We have started thinking about our rights. But why is it that Shree does not support this parliamentary democracy? This question of rights. If you have to study the birth of this democracy, because it took birth in England, many years back. But at that time, it was not a birth as a parliamentary democracy. It was not a system, parliamentary system. It was more a way of life. It is only from a way of life in a society as an individual that it grew up and it took a shape and it entered the politics and became democracy. But what is the basis of this? What is the basis of the democratic principle? The basis obviously is the reason, the rational capacity. It's only when the human beings, when the human society become more and more rational, laying stress on reason as the guide of life. Then this question of the individual rights came up, equal rights of all individuals, because in this reason, in this rationalism, and everyone has an importance. Everyone is as important as the other. But this being our reason, then suddenly we said, oh, if everyone is reason, then everybody must be having equal rights in the society, in his life, in what he's getting and what he's not getting. Then how do you voice all these reasons of these rational people? Then they selected a group saying, hey, you represent myself, my group. Hey, you represent our aspirations. So this became a representative democracy. And therefore, the Britishers had brought in a representative democracy. And as it was evolving, as it had evolved from a small status to a great parliamentary system, it did not really sit down one day and in one year and start there, putting down. It's an ever-evolving thing. So Shree would say for them, it is a very good thing perhaps. Because they gave it birth in a certain way and rose to parliamentary democracy. But in our country, we had democratic principles society, of the individuals, of religion, of all that. We had the principles of a society developing. But we never had this kind of a cut and paste system imposed on us. You take it or leave it. This is parliamentary democracy and this is our constitution. That could not be. That's why we are oppressed. So today, all the problems that we are here are because that has been given on us. And another thing that we see is that the Western world, after England, many Western world, even many countries have taken up this parliamentary democracy for the different forms. But today, the whole world has become democratic, and everyone is wanting to become democratic. But why is Shree telling us that we have to go through this bad experience. Because we in India, we are intellectual, we have rational capacity, but our swabhava itself is not that of a mental civilization. We are not known to be as a mental civilization, nor even an emotional civilization, because our swabhava is spiritual basically, which integrates, which puts together the intellectual, the emotional, the physical thing, what we call, the brahmacharya, the grihastha, the vanaprastha, the sannyasa, all these elements of Indian life are coming together. So we cannot be classified as mental, rational civilization. So that is why democracy, which really suits a proper mental civilization, may not be suitable to us. Because some of our people in the villages and here little places, they don't rationalize. They just go by the intuition or the emotion or something that guides them. Because we have seen so many people exchanging their governments. But at the same time, show in the comments that this democracy, we send our representatives, but how many are there who represent and serve the country for the sake of the country? They all serve themselves, their own self-interest of power and money and power and grabbing. So Sri Aurobindo is blunt to say our representatives are not our rational representatives. We send them out of emotions, out of some bribery, out of this our country and money and all that. So see, he has seen the problem right from the rationalistic point of view and as it is today. So that is why he says we have to change. But unfortunately, he says is our national yoga means the nation has to go through a long process of suffering. And that's what again and again I come back to Somnath Chatterjee to say that we already started feeling that this parliamentary democracy is not really fruitful for the country. Well, these are the two major things. But you'll be surprised to see that way back, I mean, again, when I say way back, before he came to Pondicherry, even in the prior Pondicherry days, when he was in Bengal or Baroda, he even went into the problems of poverty. It's amazing. People may think, oh, he's a great philosopher and supermind and all that intuitions. But here was a person who could get into one of the problems of India, what we said, many political parties, they say, Garibi Hatao, we make India a country. But all that has been slogans. The Shree himself says, the increasing poverty of the masses has been the subject of innumerable pamphlets, speeches, and newspaper articles. But we are apt to think our duty done when we have proved that the poverty problem is there. We leave the solution to the future and forget that by the time the solution comes, the masses will have sunk into a condition of decay from which it will take the nation many decades to recover. These words are prophetic. This is how every party in our country, political party, has treated, has used poverty as only an instrument for their own votes, giving big slogans. And then they say, oh, we have recognized that, but what have we done that? But that's nothing. So the Indian peasantry have always been distinguished from the less civilized masses of Europe by the superior piety. We have been accustomed to deal only with the economical side of this poverty, but there's a moral side which is even very important. You see, it really shows a philosopher, a political philosopher, a social philosopher, who doesn't go just by the external thing of poverty. But then he says, beyond this external physical poverty, the moral poverty, and then as you were saying earlier, the intellectual poverty is much more. And here, very interesting thing, which would be quite unthinkable in the case of Sri Aurobindo, he has even dealt with the problem of liquor. He said they are now being brutalized by unexampled oppression, attracted to the liquor shop. They mean these poor people. Said they are being attracted to the liquor shops which a benevolent government liberally supplies. bestialized by the example of an increasingly immoral aristocracy and gradually driven to the same habits of looseness and brutality which disgraced the European proletariat. I think this we have seen very many times during this COVID times. The first thing that happened when the COVID was gone, the liquor shops were open. And you see, one side we say we want to solve the problem of liquor and the poverty, and the other side, Aurobindo says that moral degradation. That means you are supplying them free, almost free, with liquor things, and all that you are doing for what? Only for your own self-interest. You are not seeing that you are making the poor poorer. They are making them more and more immoral. They are more and more bestial. So Aurobindo comes into that level also, he says, and in his own times it happened. This degeneration is proceeding with an alarming rapidity. In some of the parts of the country, it has gone so far that recovery seems impossible. We have heard of villages where the liquor shops and the prostitute institutions unknown 25 years ago have now the mastery of the poorest villages. Many of the villages in the West Bengal are now well supplied with the essential of Western civilization. These conditions of the worst districts tend to become general, and unless something is done to stem the tide of evil, it will sweep away of the soul of India in its turbid current and leave only a shapeless monstrosity of all that is worst in human nature. I mean, I've given you examples. You see, he has dealt with the most root causes, democracy and education. And also here was a social philosopher who looked into the smaller, the ground level problems, the liquor, the poverty, and all that's happening. But there's one problem that is dealt with, which is really very, very relevant to the present times. You'll know why I say. Only the race which does not sacrifice the soundness of its rural root of life to the urban billions of its foliage and flowering is in a sound condition of certain permanence. What is the meaning? We must now turn to the one field of work in which this direction which we have most neglected, the field of agriculture. So what we say, that is really a practical philosopher. It's not the cloudy philosopher. He looks and he says, if you neglect the agriculture side, then you are doomed again. So how meticulous Aurobindo was to look at the problems of agriculture, the poverty, the liquor, the shops, or the prostitutes, and all that. So we cannot have, I think, perhaps a greater philosopher, because here philosophy is not. That's why I now understand why Aurobindo says, "I'm not a philosopher. For heaven's sake, don't call me that." Because philosophy is only the mental exercise. It's only a woolly thing of ideas. But for him, all life was yoga. All life can be turned into the divine. So when he says all life, he has to take into account the agriculturists and the poor people and all of them, seeing that it is an embracing thing. Philosophy is not just a mental thing, it's a thing of a whole life. And that is how I feel the first book he wrote, we call it The Life Divine. Because he's embracing the life. He's not embracing a mental thought, a Western philosophy versus this Socrates versus or Shankaracharya. It's not a comparison of thought level. That's why he didn't write what is going to happen, life divine. It's the life. So we see for Aurobindo, he obviously is not a philosopher. He's one of those visionaries who has taken up entire life from the smallest to the biggest and seeing what can be done to really solve India and the world. But towards the end, I have only to tell you a few more things. But this time I'll take help of the mother. Some more problems and some more solutions. But these are given by the mother, which also means only the light of Aurobindo. The mother mentions in one of her interviews in 1965, the number one problem of India now is to find back and manifest her soul. The question is, how to find back India's soul? Become conscious of your psychic being. Let your psychic being become intensely interested in India's soul and aspire towards it with an attitude of service. And if you are sincere, you will succeed. It must sound very philosophical and very difficult. But this is exactly what she has done in integral education. Where she laid the emphasis on psychic being, the contact with the psychic being. So it is a question of spreading these ideals of integral education, and that, if it's caught in the children in a couple of generations, this will come forward. And another question: what is the duty of every Indian today in the present emergency? There was an emergency period, I suppose all of us know. Overgrow your small egoistic personality and become a worthy child of our Mother India. Fulfill your duties with honesty and rectitude. And always keep cheerful and confident with a steady trust in the Divine's grace. And then you would see, question is, if you are asked to comment on the reality as you see it, how would you do in one sentence? The mother replies, the present reality is a big falsehood, hiding an eternal truth. Question: what, according to you, are the three main barriers that stand between the vision and the reality? Ignorance, fear, falsehood. Well, it may be, some of us may say, what is this big philosophy? But we don't have time to discuss. But you can see ignorance, fear, and falsehood are what are really gripping the society at present. So she would say, this is our weakness. Are you satisfied with the overall progress India has made since independence? Obviously, no. What is our most outstanding achievement in recent times? Why do you consider it so important? Waking up of the yearning for truth. Because without truth, there is no reality. And one important one, can you name our saddest failure? On what grounds do you regard it as so tragic? Mother replies, our saddest failure, she says, insincerity. And I think we are wanted to shut our mouth because this is very obvious. That insincerity is what is there in every human being. And in India, we are experiencing that on every level. Because insincerity leads to ruin. I mean, these are the spiritual angle of looking at problem, not just economically, we must give these projects and this development. But it is a kind of a spiritual upliftment we have to have. And Sri and Mother have always said, until and unless you change your consciousness, nothing is going to work. So that's why the Mother says, the saddest failure is that we have insincerity, and since insincerity leads to our ruin. One last question here. How does the Mother view the progress of science and technology in India? What contribution can they make to the growth of the spirit in man? That is science and technology. Mother says its only use is to make the material basis stronger, completer, and more effective for the manifestation of the spirit. Mother, the country feels much concerned about national unity. Remember Sri Aurobindo's message for 15th of August started with that India is free but not united. So they're asking the question, and today also the same question is there in front of all the political parties, that what should be done for national unity. What is the mother's vision of things? How will India do her duty by herself and by the world? The Mother replies, the unity of all nations is the compelling future of the world. But for the unity of all nations to be possible, each nation must first realize its own unity. This is a marvelous guideline, because we are discussing in some other seminar why SARC is not completing, why SARC is not successful. And I've taken this idea that until and unless each nation that belongs to that marks SARC is a nation that has been united within itself. We cannot unite with others. And that's one thing the European Union has done. Each nation is complete. And then only after completing the nationhood that they have gone to the next step of this unity of European Union. Here also she's saying, unless and until we complete our national unity, we cannot think or aspire for a greater unification. Well, very significant, the last question says, there's one thing, let India work for the future and take the lead. Thus she will recover the true place in the world. This is the significant thing for the present parties in our country. Since long it was the habit to govern through division and cooperation, opposition. The time has come to govern through union, mutual understanding, and collaboration. To choose a collaborator, the value of the man is more important than the party to which he belongs. It's a very significant thing. To choose a collaborator, the value of the man is more important than the party to which he belongs. The greatness of a country does not depend on the victory of a party, but on the union of all the parties. There's a very big signal what we at present can do, what our present government ought to do. But ought to do is a big word. But has the time come? Have all the parties realized that? Even when we say we must have only one national election, there's so many oppositions. Well, those are political questions that I don't want to get into. But the greatness of a country is that when we all come together, it says, the greatness of a country does not depend on the victory of a party, but on the union of all parties. But obviously, much time is required, greater evolution of consciousness is required. We have all to leave behind our own ignorance, our own egos, come together individually and then collectively. We see a whole gamut. We are Aurobindo going from the problems that are really national level, the democracy and education, and then at an individual level, at a group, smaller group level, at the poverty and the agriculture and all that. And as the mother herself has given some more hints, how to govern, what is the best way of governance, how to choose a collaborator, and what can we do to serve the country best. Each individual must be sincere and honest to his own duty. There's a beautiful things on the national level, on the social level, and on the individual level. These are some of the major problems and their guidelines and their solutions. Many things can be discussed in this line, but I thought at the present times, in the given time, these are some of the things that I could highlight. Thank you so much for listening.
So, namaste and thank you very much, Shree, Dr. Hanuman Chowdary Garu, for your talk and survey of Sri Aurobindo's life before Pondicherry and after, and to share with all of us his political views. And thank you, Dr. V. Ananda Reddy, for enlightening us by sharing the guidelines, the spiritual guidelines of what Sri Aurobindo and the mother had to say to solve India's problems. So obviously the problems don't lie, the solutions don't lie only in external kind of factors, but we need to change from within. So let us all together aspire sincerely to be able to be really true to the spirit of India and serve our great nation. So for paucity of time, I would just request all of the participants, all the members, to post their questions in the form that has been already provided to all of you. So thank you one and all for being part of this talk this evening, these two talks. Thank you very much from the Institute of Human Study. And I'm sure, thank you Pragna Bharati, the group of Pragna Bharati members, for being part and jointly coming up with this talk for this evening. Thank you very much.